Welcome to EduPlanet 21's 10-Minute Tuesdays, a series of conversations with experts in education. My name is Claire Koop-Scott, and I'm with the content team at EduPlanet 21. We're excited to be speaking with instructional leaders from Hampton Township School District outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about their move to and use of Understanding by Design framework in their curriculum. I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Lawhead, Superintendent of Schools, and Dr. Jackie Ramochek, Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. Welcome to 10-Minute Tuesdays.
Thank you very much. We're glad to be with you. Good morning.
So can you tell us a little bit about your school district?
Sure. Hampton is a school district that is just north of Pittsburgh, a few miles north of the city. It's a traditional district that has been performing very well for many years. It's on the smaller side compared to some of the districts around the state and around the country, about 3,000 students or so. We have a rich tradition of academic excellence with a Blue Ribbon High School that just was re-awarded the Blue Ribbon. Kind of a 20-year cycle. Our elementary schools, our Blue Ribbon schools, our middle school just received an award as a schools to watch. One of the things that we're faced with is a district like this needs to continue to evolve to be a world-class school district. And that's the benchmark that we're looking at, is how do we remain relevant? How do we continue to remain competitive? We're in a top 10 status ranking every year with districts around the state, and we want to maintain that status. So excited to be able to share some of what we've discovered.
Great. So kind of dovetailing that, can you talk about how you got started with UBD for curriculum design and what prompted your move from past practices?
Well, it actually started a little bit before Dr. Mochek and I came here, but we were also in the region doing this kind of work with Understanding by Design for several years. And so it was kind of a very nice fit that this had started just before we both arrived here. And we were able to kind of keep it moving, but also to re-energize that. I believe the process started because there was an acknowledgement here in the district that a curriculum design change process needed to be in place to, as I described earlier, kind of evolve the district for it to remain competitive. And I think it all started around the idea of what does good assessment look like? Formative assessment, summative assessment, and how is that linked to standards? And I think that was the genesis of it.
It was, and I can say that because prior to my role here, I served in this district in another capacity as one of the assistant principals at the high school. So I kind of, from that lens, I sort of saw this process evolve. And knowing that there was a rich emphasis in the district on assessment, and really thinking about ways to make assessment opportunities authentic and relevant for students. And so that has a very nice tie into, when you're thinking about ways to kind of lift the level of rigor of it, the depth of knowledge with the assessments and make them relevant, that has such a nice connection and flow to the performance tasks and the performance assessment piece of the Understanding by Design framework. So actually, I think that focus on assessment within the district really was sort of a stepping stone to now let's think even more broadly, and let's focus in on how are we carefully designing those learning experiences, the goals and so forth, with that lens also. So that's sort of the complement and why the Understanding by Design framework seemed to happen seamlessly is the next steps in the process of how we move forward.
Great. So can you talk a little bit about how UBD was introduced at your district and kind of maybe what went well and what things maybe didn't work as well as had hoped?
So initially, there was the principals in the buildings had that led some professional learning with their staff regarding Understanding by Design. I think for the most part, it was still fairly new of being implemented when both of us arrived here. So some of the things that we found to work well, and we kind of learned these as going through the process, but really getting some high quality professional development with some of the team from Jay McTighe's group was really helpful for our folks. And we spent that time with a professional development and developing our teacher leaders. So looking at our curriculum leaders at the elementary level, looking at our middle school and department chairs, looking at our department liaisons, which are composed of the art and the music folks, and really kind of bringing them all in to experience some of that. And that happened for quite a few days that we had that process roll out over time. But one of the most beneficial pieces of that occurred as a result of that work was the introduction, and what our folks created is sort of a glossary to help us define as a district what the components of understanding by design mean for us. If you're looking at that template and starting to get into all the different components of the template, it can be overwhelming. And people interpret things differently. So as a district, we spent some time defining that glossary, creating it, making it our own, and really then referring our folks back to it over the course of, as they're sitting and thinking, is this an essential question? We'll pull up that glossary and kind of run it through that definition that we constructed together. So I think that was a really helpful strategy that we used as a district to kind of get us all on the same page of how do we interpret transfer goals? What does that look like for us? How do we interpret stage 3 versus stage 2? That really, I think, first and foremost in starting was probably one of the most beneficial things we did.
That's great. Do you have any other best practices that you would recommend in terms of implementation of UBD in a district?
I think one of the things that is very important for this to work is that your entire leadership team, building principals, district office, anyone that's touching the academic program needs to be involved and needs to have a high level understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it and what backward mapping is and the philosophy behind it and the power of it, so that everyone is talking the same language and everyone understands. Without that, it can splinter very quickly. It is a fairly complex process, and you need to have your entire team believe in it, or at least acknowledge its power and to support it. I would just say from a superintendent's level, this isn't something that you want to delegate and not be involved. As a superintendent, you need to go to workshops. You need to present on understanding by design. You need to go to team meetings with teachers who are doing the work. It can't be an exercise or treated like a transportation process. It's the core of what a good school district, an excellent school district needs to do. And the superintendent as a lead learner has to model that and believe in it, which is hard to do because there's so many things that take us away from the academic program issues. I would recommend that very strongly. And I think it pays off in dividends when you need to support the change.
And I guess my other piece I would mention with that is really creating a purpose for the work. So the why, I guess, in terms of sitting down and having the conversations and getting involved in that process, because it is time consuming. So, if you can use it so a good example might be, as you think about like NGSS, those standards, or you're thinking about like the math practices or whatever it is, if there's sort of gaps in how you're doing things, then understanding by design is a perfect way to go about addressing those gaps. But we have to kind of acknowledge maybe what the gaps are to create a organizational purpose to help define the work and the why of the work.
So is there anything you would do differently if you had to turn back the clock?
My biggest thing would be don't necessarily introduce the UBD template as sort of the first way of going about it. I think when people see that and sit down and kind of go through it, for the most part, educators are linear folks, and they move through that template and think like transfer goals and sometimes kind of get stuck at that. So my suggestion would be kind of meeting people where they are. So if, many teachers, if you sit down and you talk about the skills related to it or the knowledge, you can elicit that from them and then have those bigger conversations as the why, to get after those understandings and those transfer goals. The why is that important, and to make sense of it. So that would be my piece of it, kind of meet people where they are relative to the process and have the conversations around where they are. You could do that through an assessment too. If somebody had a great example of a performance task, you could sit down and say, what are you assessing here, and pull out that evaluative criteria of that performance task, and then use that to help inform your knowledge and your skills and understandings within the unit. So my word of caution would be, don't necessarily let that template be the first encounter that folks have with it, facilitate those conversations around the thinking and the bigger ideas of the content area and the performance pieces of it before sort of introducing that template.
So what's next for you in terms of curriculum design and UBD? Where are you headed?
Well, we've come to believe that the understanding by design process is the process to reinvent the instructional practice using technology where it fits, where it can really make that change happen strategically and not in just a haphazard manner. So I'd say that's one of the significant aspects of the future for us is using this tool to help us strategically employ instructional technology in a way that really redefines our instructional practice. And without understanding by design, I have a feeling we'd be floundering. And right now, we see some of the things happening in the classrooms that are very inspiring. We still got a lot of work to do. We were just chatting earlier that, we don't want folks to think that because it's not a once and done, I've written the units, I'm done. No, this is a cyclical process that never stops. And we've got to be sure that we support our faculty in going deeper, redefining, recreating. It's also a process for us to educate our board and community how that curriculum design work is very different than, a 7-year adoption cycle for a textbook. In 7 years, we're going to adopt a new textbook and write a new curriculum. No, this is an annual work. And actually, digital resources help that new mindset because they're digital resources that are appearing yearly that we need to integrate. Well, how do we do that? It's through understanding by design and curriculum mapping. So those are my thoughts for the future. I don't know.
No, I would agree. I mean, I think the access to technology has really sort of complemented the work of the performance tasks and so forth that our teachers have been working on. It's been that natural connection, which is what you want. And we're able to kind of capture it through the UBD process and framework. We're able to capture it in a deliberate way. And I think if anything, we keep going back to the question and we want to continue to go back to the question of like, what's the why? What's the purpose of the learning? And so the UBD framework and kind of capturing the purpose of the learning and trying to kind of align our assessments to that and our instructional activities to that has made things, will continue to make things very deliberate on our end.
Great. Well, I appreciate you joining me today and sharing your insight and all of your experience. And I look forward to having some future conversations with you about more of the great work you're doing at Hampton.
Thank you. Our pleasure.